Female
Tell me when.
repro. Go.
Okay, so female repro starting with, you should see this kind of yellow fatty looking structure right here, right? If I pull this off, right there. This is the ovary, okay? So we start with, you can see ovary right there. If you look at it from the top, right, there's ovary right there, right? Now, for uterine tube, what we should see for the uterine tube, we're actually going to start from the uterus. So we can see here's the uterus. If we put it all back together like this, right, we're looking down, okay? Here's the uterus, right here. This is the uterus. And if we come from the uterus, what we should see is, you can call it many different things. Most common name, we call it the fallopian tube. Okay, so here, right here, this is the fallopian tube. Okay, you can also call it a salpinx, or you can call it an oviduct, or yeah, just uterine tube is fine. Okay, now it gets divided up into different portions. Okay, so that first portion coming from the connection from the uterus, kind of extending out, we call the isthmus, right? And then there should be a swelling, kind of a swollen up portion, and I think they're trying to color code it. So it's kind of a swollen portion right here, where that's the ampulla, and maybe where they shaded it slightly different color right here is representing the infundibulum, maybe. I'm not 100% sure if they're trying to show infundibulum there, but the infundibulum is the funnel-shaped portion where it's kind of narrow and it spreads out into like a big cone or funnel, which leads to the fimbriae. Okay, so the fimbriae are these little finger-like projections. Okay, and those fimbriae, they look like they're covering the ovary, but they're actually not really covering or touching the ovary. It's kind of near it, and if it were an actual ovary here, the fimbriae would just kind of be sitting like near it like this. And they're supposed to kind of draw the released egg into the fallopian tube. Right? Now, when we're dealing with ligaments, with the ligaments of the ovary, the female reproductive tract, we start with, there was just kind of this broad covering over here, and what you should see is the cut edge, the cut surface right here. You can see the cut surface of this serosa, which is supposed to be covering everything, or in fact you can call it a peritoneum, which is covering everything right here, right? Covers over, right? Covers over the bladder here, all of this peritoneum. When we get to the female reproductive tract, it's going to fold over, just like we're seeing right here, and kind of form this double layer. When it folds over and forms that double layer, it's going to form essentially a mesentery, which is suspending all of these female organs. So when we take all of the female mesenteries together, that's what we refer to as the broad ligament, okay? Broad ligament of the uterus, and we can divide it up into, there are different portions. Remember, we were able to call the fallopian tube the salpinx? So the portion of the broad ligament, or the mesentery, which is suspending the salpinx, is called the mesosalpinx, right? There's mesosalpinx. Now, if we then move to what's actually suspending the ovary itself, inside here, suspending the ovary, is the mesovarium. This is the mesentery of the ovary, the mesovarium. Now, actually coming across and hanging off of the uterus itself is the mesometrium. Now, again, when we take all of them together and we make one big long sheet which covers up all of that female repro, kind of hanging from the side of the body wall, coming across to the body wall over here, that is the broad ligament of the uterus. We also have other ligaments, right? So broad ligament, and we have some true ligaments. And the true ligaments of the female reproductive tract are derivatives of what we would normally call in a male the gubernaculum, right? Some people say the female gubernaculum, but essentially it is the connective tissue structure which was anchored to the gonad. In the male it's the testis, in the female it's the ovary, and goes down and will eventually go out of the body wall through the inguinal canal, and it will anchor itself in the outside of the body wall to, in the undifferentiated form, what's referred to as the labioscrotal swellings. That means in the male, it's anchored in the scrotum. In the female, it's anchored in the labia majora. So with the female, the gubernaculum ends up getting split into two different pieces. The part that's still anchored to the ovary, and we call that the ovarian ligament. Sometimes you can also call it proper ligament of the ovary. So here's ovarian ligament. Don't confuse that with the fallopian tube or salpinx right here. And then the other portion, we're just starting to see it a little bit right here, is what will become the round ligament of the uterus. Okay, if I put this down and we focus on this one, the round ligament of the uterus is coming out from here and extends all the way to the body wall. It will pass through the inguinal canal, and then it's going to anchor itself in the labia majora. Okay? Now, what that means is the female, the equivalent, the homologue of the gubernaculum, it was supposed to be anchoring the ovary and going out to the labia majora, but what ends up happening is as the uterus grows and gets bigger, the uterus essentially, if this was the gubernaculum, the uterus essentially grows into the gubernaculum and splits it up into two different pieces. The part that's anchoring the ovary, which is the ovarian ligament, and the part which goes outside to the labia majora, which is now the round ligament of the uterus. Okay? Now, if we look at the internal structures, right, it's a little bit easier to divide up the different layers. For the uterus itself, right, if we're going to kind of, get our bearings right here, this weird blue structure that we see right here, this represents the pubic bone, and in fact, it's right at the midline, so it's the pubic symphysis, and we start to move, posteriorly, or if you want, you can think of it as dorsally. We next come across the urinary bladder. You can tell because it's full of the rugae, and you can see the urethra, which is emptying that. Over here, this represents the uterus, and then back here, this is the last part of the hindgut, so we're getting the sigmoid colon leading to the rectum. Over here, if we focus on the uterus itself, this pink internal lining that we see here, that is the endometrium. So there's endometrium surrounded by the muscular layer, and you can see they're trying to illustrate it as muscles. This is the myometrium right here, and then finally that external layer we have is the perimetrium. Okay, and again, we can still see there is peritoneum, right? Peritoneum lining the body wall here, peritoneum starting to come over onto the urinary bladder, peritoneum coming over lining the uterus right here. So it's parietal peritoneum, and we have visceral peritoneum over here. Okay. If we look at the uterus, the transition from the uterus down into the vagina, right here, we can see this is the vagina, this is the vaginal canal. The transitional area, we can see there's a canal right here also. Ignore that hole, that's just for the model. This area right here is the cervix. It is a muscular area. It's essentially circular muscle. It's a sphincter. So what we have right here, this is the cervix, and the cervix has a length to it. So it has what is referred to as an internal os. Okay, that just means the internal mouth. Os just means mouth. This is the internal os. This is the external os. And in between the internal and external os are the, is the cervical canal. Just like there is a vaginal canal, there is a cervical canal. And you should notice that the cervix forms this kind of like domed or arched structure right here. If we look at the arch which goes around this dome, that's referred to as the fornix, because the fornix is just an arch. Now, coming away from the uterus, going away from the fornix, we go down into the vagina or the vaginal canal here. The vaginal canal will eventually lead to, this is an area known as the vestibule. And we should see right here, this is a labium minus, okay, of the labia minora. Out here on the outside, this is a labium majus of the labia majora, right? Now what we should notice is, like we said, here is the urinary bladder right here. This is the urethra, which is emptying the urinary bladder. And the way you can still tell in a person whether you are in the vestibule or whether you are in the vagina, in this model, it's very easy to see the cuts and it's easy to tell the difference. But in real life, right, you don't usually cut people in half like this. And the way that you can tell whether you're in the vestibule or in the vagina is the external urethral orifice marks the beginning of the vagina and the end of the vestibule if you are entering from the outside. Okay, so coming from the outside, you pass in between the labia minora and you have entered the vestibule. Once you get past the external urethral sphincter, you are then inside of what's referred to as the actual vagina. Okay. Now, I know in the model it looks like really widely separated, but in real life they're a lot closer and they look a lot different when you look at them. Now, as we're going away from the labia minora, labia majora, we're going to get across another midline structure right here, and this is the clitoris. Okay, so this is the clitoris, and yes, you can say this little portion, which is supposed to stick out in between the anterior commissure of the labia minora, would often be referred to as the glans clitoris. Just like there is a glans penis, you can also sometimes say that there is a glans clitoris. And you can see that the clitoris is anchored, okay? Clitoris is anchored by, what we're starting to see right here is a crus of the clitoris. Just like there is a crus of the penis, there is a crus of the clitoris, right? There is erectile tissue, which makes up the clitoris. And so just like the portions of the male penis, which are made of corpora cavernosa, are what give rise to the crura of the penis, it's the same thing for the clitoris. So this is made of corpora cavernosa, right? And that's what helps to create the crus of the clitoris. There is no bulb. We don't have a bulb of the clitoris or bulbar structure like we do in the male, because in the male, these midline structures are going to fuse to each other and will eventually form the bulb of the penis. But in the female, the equivalent, the erectile tissues which are going to form the labia minora, do not fuse, so we don't have a fused midline structure in the on the female like we do in the male. So no bulb. It's not like we have bulb of the labia minora in the same way they have a bulb of the penis. They remain separate. I think that's it.